I decided to move across the country for work. I had a lot of things to sell, things I couldn't or didn't want to take with me. Naturally, Craigslist became my go-to. I had managed to sell off most of my furniture, gadgets, and other odds and ends without much hassle. There was one item, however, that proved to be more of a challenge: my DSLR camera. It was an expensive model with a few high-end lenses. I had put it up on Craigslist hoping to find a buyer who knew its worth. That's when I got an email from a man named Greg. His message was brief. "Interested in the camera, can I see it tomorrow?" After a brief exchange, we decided to meet at a local Starbucks, thinking it'd be safer to meet in a public place. The next day I arrived at Starbucks a little early. Greg was already there, sitting in a corner with a somewhat blank expression. He was a tall man, probably in his early 40s, thinning hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to stare a bit too intently. I walked over, introducing myself. He gave a slight nod and immediately asked about the camera. I showed him the DSLR, detailing its features and the added lenses. He seemed knowledgeable, asking relevant questions. As we discussed, however, he kept glancing around, seemingly anxious. Just when I started to feel uneasy, Greg suddenly stood up and said, "Let's go to my car. I have the cash there." I hesitated. We were in a public place. Why couldn't he bring the money inside? Sensing my hesitation, he added, "I don't like carrying a lot of cash around. My car's just in the parking lot." I weighed my options. The parking lot was full and it was broad daylight. Thinking it was safe, I agreed. We walked to his car, a black older model sedan. He opened the trunk to reveal a camera bag similar to mine and what looked like photography equipment. But what caught my attention were several newspaper clippings scattered around, each one reporting missing persons or unsolved disappearances. My heart raced. I tried to maintain my composure, thinking maybe it was just a coincidence. Greg noticed my gaze and quickly said, "I follow crime stories. Thinking of writing a book." His voice had an edge, and his previous anxiety seemed to have vanished, replaced by a chilling calm. He took out an envelope, presumably with the money, but didn't hand it to me. Instead, he said, "Why don't you put the camera in the bag? I want to make sure it fits." Again, I hesitated. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming at me to run, but I was also trapped in the fear of the moment. As I slowly moved to place the camera in the bag, trying to think of a way out, a car pulled up next to us. It was a couple, probably just finished shopping, loading their car. They gave us a casual glance. Seizing the moment, I blurted out, "Greg, you remember my brother, right?" The couple looked confused, but before Greg could say anything, I continued, "We're done here. Let's go inside and finish our coffee." Greg was caught off guard. The couple, sensing something amiss, lingered, their presence providing me a semblance of security. With an icy glare, Greg threw the envelope at me. "Take your camera," he hissed. I grabbed the camera and envelope and quickly made my way back to Starbucks, with the couple following closely. Once inside, I thanked them. They had caught on to the weird vibe and decided to intervene. Later, when I recounted the events to the police, they found Greg's car abandoned. The clippings, equipment, and even the camera bag were all there, just as I had described. But of Greg, there was no trace. The more chilling discovery, however, came from the clippings. Several of them were not just random crime stories. They were about people who had vanished after last being seen meeting someone for a Craigslist transaction. Although I managed to sell my camera and safely move, the memory of that day remains etched in my mind. Every time I think of it, I'm reminded of how a seemingly harmless transaction can go awry, and how the line between the ordinary and the sinister can be terrifyingly thin. And Greg? He remains a phantom, a chilling reminder that our digital world, with all its convenience, also brings with it dangers that lurk just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had just moved into my first apartment and was searching for a cheap but stylish cabinet to store my collection of books. New furniture was out of my budget, so I turned to Craigslist. I'd found several deals there in the past. After a few days of searching, I stumbled across a listing. Beautiful antique wooden cabinet, perfect condition, $1.50 or best offer. The accompanying photo showcased a tall, dark wooden cabinet with intricate carvings. I was smitten. I reached out to the seller, and we agreed to meet at his place later that week. The only condition he had was that we meet after dark because he worked odd hours. I found it a bit odd, but shrugged it off. On the evening of the pickup, I drove to the address given. It was situated on the outskirts of town, far from the familiar surroundings of the city. As I approached, I noticed the house looked abandoned. The lawn was overgrown, and the exterior paint was chipped. Swallowing my unease, I knocked on the door. It opened moments later to reveal a man in his 50s, with unkempt gray hair and a thin, almost skeletal frame. He introduced himself as Peter. Without waiting for my response, Peter turned and led the way inside. The interior of the house was just as unkempt as its owner. Old newspapers and dishes lay scattered around, and the walls were stained with what looked like mold. "The cabinet is in the basement," he murmured. I hesitated. The situation was beginning to feel uncomfortable. "Maybe we could bring it up here?" Peter seemed irritated. "It's too heavy, come." Feeling trapped and not wanting to anger him, I followed, though every instinct screamed at me to run. The basement was dimly lit. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed the cabinet just as beautiful as the photos. But there was something else. Chains and tools hung on the walls, and in the corner I saw what appeared to be large stains on the floor, dark and foreboding. Peter noticed my gaze. "Old house, lots of history," he mumbled, attempting to sound casual. Suddenly my phone buzzed in my pocket. Peter's eyes darted toward the noise. "Sorry, it's probably my friend. I told her where I was coming today. She's expecting me back soon," I lied, praying it would buy me some security. Peter's demeanor changed. He seemed anxious. "Let's get this over with." We started moving the cabinet. As we lifted, something slipped from a crack in its back, landing on the floor with a thud. It looked like a small, leather-bound journal. Curious, I picked it up, opening it to the first page, and my heart stopped. Inside were pictures, photographs of women with dates scribbled below them. Each subsequent page showed the same woman, but in various states of distress. Peter's voice shattered the silence, sounding more like a hiss. "You shouldn't have seen that." I backed away, my mind racing, trying to find a way out. "Peter, I'm going to leave the cabinet. Just let me go." Peter lunged at me, but adrenaline kicked in, and I managed to sidestep, knocking over a table in the process. I raced up the stairs with him close behind. Bursting out of the house, I jumped into my car, locking the doors just as Peter reached them. He pounded on the windows, but I started the car and sped off. My heart still racing, I drove straight to the police station. I handed them the journal and told them everything. The following days were a blur. The police raided Peter's house and found the remains of multiple women buried in his backyard. The journal I'd found was proof of his heinous activities over the years. I was praised for my discovery, but I couldn't shake off the horror. Every night I had nightmares of being trapped in that basement. The beautiful cabinet, once an object of my desire, became a symbol of a close encounter with pure evil. To this day I remain cautious of online deals, haunted by the memory of that night and the grim reality that there are monsters among us, hidden behind the guise of ordinary people. On a quiet, overcast evening, I found myself sifting through Craigslist, hunting for a replacement for my recently damaged MacBook Pro. One particular ad seemed almost too good to be true. A high-end laptop, barely a year old, at a shockingly low price. The seller, identified as Mike, mentioned receiving an updated model as a gift, explaining his eagerness to part with the older one. Against my better judgment, driven by a mix of desperation and the allure of the deal, I decided to contact him. Our email exchange was brief and somewhat off-putting. Mike's urgency was palpable. He insisted on meeting as soon as possible, well after the sun had set, at a remote park on the city's outskirts. The location raised several red flags, but the thought of securing such a bargain overpowered my apprehension. The insistence on cash payment only heightened my wariness. As I approached the park, the weight of the evening's stillness settled heavily around me. Sparse lampposts provided minimal light, allowing shadows to dance menacingly on the outskirts of their glow. An owl's distant hoot and the rustling of leaves beneath my feet were the only interruptions to the unsettling silence. From the depths of the darkness, a silhouette emerged. "Here for the laptop?" The voice was raspy, betraying a hint of concealed aggression. Swallowing my unease, I nodded. Mike revealed the MacBook, and from a distance it looked genuine. However, as I held it, several inconsistencies became apparent. There were scratches that belied its supposed age, dents on its frame, and a few keys looked suspiciously worn out. "This isn't the mint condition you mentioned," I remarked, regretting the entire venture. His barely visible face under the hooded jacket seemed to contort into a scowl. "It works perfectly. At this price, you're practically stealing it." Attempting to control my rising panic, I offered, "Considering its state, would 300 be fair?" That's when the atmosphere shifted from merely unsettling to downright threatening. "You're trying to con me?" he growled. Before I could formulate a response, two more figures emerged from the enveloping shadows, their intentions clearly hostile. "Give us the money now," one of them whispered menacingly, his voice chillingly calm. Suddenly, the park was bathed in the unexpected brightness of car headlights. An engine roared to life and a horn blared. Seizing the opportunity, I sprinted toward the road, leaving the laptop and the money behind. The trio was momentarily disoriented, but soon I could hear their footsteps pounding the ground behind me. My heart raced, each beat echoing the seconds I needed to get to safety. Barely making it to a nearby road, a car screeched to a halt beside me. The driver, a middle-aged woman, urgently beckoned me inside. Without hesitation, I jumped in, and she floored the accelerator, leaving my pursuers behind. Catching my breath, I profusely thanked her, learning she'd been visiting a nearby house and had seen the shadows and sensed something amiss. Later, when I reported the incident to the local authorities, I discovered a terrifying fact: that park had been the site of several unsolved disappearances over the past few years. Many believed they were enticed by deceptive deals, just like I was. The chilling brush with danger was a brutal reminder. Some deals, no matter how enticing, carry a price far heavier than money.